You're tuned in to RX Radio.
We're running out of ideas. That's just what it.
I've been out of ideas. There was literally a point not too long ago, maybe about a year ago. We just looked back at our first 20 episodes and we're like, yeah, let's just redo these.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone noticed.
No.
Like
The thing
we pay attention to what other podcasts do, and we notice that it's a lot of like rinse and repeat. So, and what episode are we at? Like 600 or something?
we got to be coming up on 6 bills. Yeah.
That's wild, dude.
It's nuts. I think if you listen to the earlier episodes, it was just angst then, and now it's just jaded.
Exhausted.
Yeah. That's the lens that we switched out.
Yeah, I don't even think it was like a progression. I don't even think it was gradual. I think it was just one day we just went from
I'm tired.
We're tired, man. We're tired, but we're here and we're making it happen.
Keep showing
up. We look, Q&As I think are a decent idea. At least that way there's some engagement, because all we do, like literally, I'm going to tell you how this episode started. Because it seems to be how health and fitness is done. It's you pick a body part or a muscle group, and you pick whether it's pain or hypertrophy, and you come up with a list of X number of things for that particular problem. And it's all reverse engineered from the title. So it's like 3 ways to fix your ankle mobility. Like we Google search that right now and put 3 ways to fix your ankle mobility podcast. There's probably 1,000.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. And what we arrived on, because I think, hey, look, in the podcast world, I got to say, in this particular episode, we are probably uniquely situated as the authority. So we're going to go over, what, do you want to go 5? You want to go 5? You want to go, let's make an even number, maybe 3 each.
I was hoping that we could just do the episode and then determine the title based off of how many points.
Okay. We're not even going to premeditate
it. Yeah,
okay.
I don't want to put that much thought into
X number of ways to grow your back. Now, I feel uniquely situated to do this episode for a few reasons. The whole chiropractic angle, I feel like, gives us maybe a little bit of an upper hand. Yeah. And the fact that, like, if I think about the health and fitness podcast space and I think of back circumference, I got to think me and you are taking the fucking cake here. Like, there's not, I can't think of people who are podcasting right now.
Yeah.
That if we were to go shoulder to shoulder, quite literally, with anyone in the podcast space, that there would be more back meat on offer than here at RX Radio.
Yeah. There's a good amount of width here. I look retarded in suits because I think I'm wider than I am tall.
Oh, man. Yeah. So this is good. We pumped our own tires a little bit, and I think we can offer some real value on the subject of back hypertrophy. And look, I'm going to start off by saying that hypertrophy is a byproduct, right? Like, hypertrophy training is because hypertrophy training and fat loss training are equally absurd endeavors, because so much of it has to do with your nutrition, right? Like, if you don't have a positive nitrogen balance, eating enough calories or protein, like, you can put on muscle in a deficit, but it's probably much harder to do. It's like, and so many people just don't do that thing, because training is fun. Training is, you get to drink pre-workout and, like, you be kind of high for a few hours. Like, it's the hey, you got to eat all of this food and eat all of this protein. Like, that's the hard part. But all to say, we're going to talk about exercise selection for back hypertrophy, and hopefully you can sort out the nutrition and diet stuff, because we have a decent amount of experience. And I think, given the conversations that are currently going on in the hypertrophy space, we may have some different takes. So I'm curious if you were to, like, maybe we'll go one for one, go like, or maybe tiers. Have you seen this thing that they're doing now?
I've seen tiers. The only thing I watch, I talked about this with Ridpath last week. The only thing I watch on the internet now is blackjack. And people getting hurt.
That's how you're feeling. Okay. Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, what happened to Jordan? Was there signs? No, that was so weird. There wasn't any signs.
Yeah.
No. Watching blackjack is wild.
Oh yeah, it's so wild. It's because they only post videos of winning. So like you would just watch and you're like, I'm gonna go to the casino and make a $500,000 real quick.
Yeah, and I'm gonna win, and I'm gonna have my own video.
Yeah. Anyways,
You'll be a gambling influencer. That's great.
that's the dream, man.
That's
If I were to be an influencer for something, it would be gambling.
yeah, yeah. You got to think that's probably the fact that that's more respectable than any other form of influencer.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what
Absolutely.
gets me are the parent influencers.
Oh yeah, they just exploit the fuck out of their children.
Dude, I heard a story. This is really sad, and I don't even know if it's worth sharing. But like, I heard a story that like there was a mom like filming her kid, and like a giant mirror fell on her kid and like died on video.
Yeah, it's pretty sad.
It's not great, but it's
Yeah.
like this is why gambling influencers are more upstanding people. Like,
I
right?
just I'll capitalize on the fact that I'm a degenerate, not like capitalize on the fact that I'm a parent, but actually a degenerate.
Well, and you're only hurting yourself, maybe.
Yeah, and those around me.
Yeah, who are financially dependent on you. That's fine. But at least you're not throwing furniture on them or something like that. You're just
Right. Yeah.
crippling them with financial debt.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll just be a
Which-
burden to them, like I always have been in
Oh,
different ways.
you know what? Be yourself. Anyways, back hypertrophy.
Yeah.
Where do you going to start? Someone comes to you, you've been training for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You go like, "Yo, I see it because I think it is a muscle group region of the body that has a fair amount of difficulties baked into the problem of like, okay, there's some prereqs that I think you'd probably need to have.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot going on back there, and there's a lot of ways you can compensate. So where do you start with someone? You go, okay, I want to grow my back. What do I do?
Yeah. I like how you start off saying that hypertrophy is a byproduct, and it's a byproduct of, yes, diet, but it's also a byproduct of stimulus, right? Is that I think the best way to grow your back is by trying to get really fucking strong. I've never met someone that is like just irresponsibly strong with a small back. And that's like, I've met a lot of people that are way stronger than humans realistically should be. So there's a caveat to that, right? And the idea is that in getting really strong, you're going to challenge yourself in a lot of ways that will force you to develop a deep understanding of the coordination of loading, of how you need to organize your body to move a lot of load, right? And that's, this is a very general idea, but if this were like one point to be made that encompasses a lot of things, if you pursue getting really strong, just period, it doesn't have to be any specific, movement, like not, you should row twice your body weight or whatever the fuck it is, like just getting really strong all around, your back is going to get pretty fucking big. Like the muscles that make up your back, the main ones people think about, like lats, erectors, rhomboids, traps. Am I missing any like bodybuilding weird ones?
I mean, people might throw the rear delts in there because they're back there, but yeah, you pretty much you've hit for the cycle.
Yeah, like it's really easy, and I think especially when people live too far in that hypertrophy realm, like everything's isolation. Like I need to be able to isolate these things. I saw some retarded bodybuilder on Instagram talking about like not low, or if you wanted a bigger back, like isolating your erectors. I'm like,
Stop.
what? How the
Stop.
fuck do you do that? Like
You need local anesthetic. You would need to
Right.
like inject lidocaine into like your rhomboids, right? Like you would just need that. There's no way.
Right. And these are the things like, dude was fucking big. Like, I'll give it to him. But these are the things that, like, being big doesn't make you qualified to be smart or understand processes. It just means that you tried really hard and you took the right drugs. But when it comes to, like, actually thinking about, like, okay, what's the best way to integrate all of these things together? If I had to put it to one exercise, it would be a deadlift. Like, if you want a big back, get good at deadlifting. Like that's going to integrate most of those muscles in against meaningful load in a way that's maybe not the most potent hypertrophy stimulus, but you're going to need a lot of strength in those muscles, and there's going to be a lot of stimulus to those muscles if you can deadlift a lot of weight. So that's like not my full answer, but I'll start off there as like a main point. It's like if you pursue strength and not necessarily just strength in isolation, strength in integration, that's going to be one of the most potent things to building a big back.
Yeah. All right. I like where this is going because I think this is a very like RX radio slant on things. And I'm gonna I'll give my first exercise, and I'll maybe parrot some of your reasoning. And mine's gonna be bent over barbell row, because I think a bent over barbell row and it's gonna be a few reasons. It teaches control in the hinge position by using your arm as perturbation for your spine, right? Where a deadlift, your arm stays more or less in the same place. Like there's not an intent through the arm, and the spine kind of moves around the arm. Where in like a row movement, it's the other way around, where the arm is moving around the spine. So there's very similar in the intent. One of the reasons I like the row is that it's usually going to be less loadable out of the gate, which means that if people are concerned about technique and they're hesitant and they're worried about getting hurt, I like the idea of a bent over barbell row because we're gonna maintain that high shear force position under far less load with a little bit of perturbation. But the reason I think these are so similar is that we can look at the mechanics of the resistance profile and the strength profile, and we can postulate about challenging muscles at various lengths, because all of those muscles in the back are going to be experiencing different relationships of length and tension. But what I think that both of these have in common is that it's really going to be bottlenecked by your erectors primarily, right? That's really going to be the first thing that's on offer. And I think that's where we're both coming from in putting it in the one spot, is like, you need to build a back from the inside out. Like you need vertebrae that are going to be able to maintain a position adjacent to one another. And you're going to need, giant train track muscles running up either side, right? If you have that, you have the foundation to build off all of the other muscles, the rhomboids, the traps, the lats, etc. If you don't have that, you're going to be punching in the dark with every other exercise that you have, because I think being able to resist force at the spine can allow you to load up so much more weight. Because the thing that I think people need to realize conceptually, and you made a good point about like isolating the rhomboids or whatever, or the mid trap, is like isolation becomes more possible the more peripheral you go in the body, right? Like if we think about dexterous fine motor movements, we have really fine motor control in our face, we have really fine motor control in our extremities, so much so that like we have individual muscles for like one of our fingers and one of our toes, right? Like our index finger runs off its own extensor and flexor, our big toe runs off its own flexor. So you can isolate a finger and a toe away from the other fingers and other toes, which is like these are quite literally the furthest things from the spine, right? So I can, flexor pollicis or extensor pollicis, flexor pollicis, I can isolate my big toe from my other toes. But as I start to move more and more towards the center of my body, just the anatomical variability that's on offer to me to isolate anything goes away. And then when you get to the rib cage, what you have is you have sort of these gross muscle contraction, gross meaning like just a lot of muscle contracting at the same time, like not a lot of isolated motor unit control per, cross-sectional area of muscle. And you also have the rib cage, which changes the fucking game, right? Like the rib cage is not liable to a lot of the instability issues that you're going to see, even as in peripheral muscles like the deltoid or the pec, or I mean, I guess more so in this example, if we're talking away from the rib cage, the bicep and the tricep, right? Like these have very unstable surfaces that will bottleneck the output. Things on the rib cage, like if you watch someone do like a farmer's carry, or like a yoke walk or something like that, these muscles are able to just eccentrically lengthen, and just the bone cylinder underneath them gives them so much ability to load. And really then what bottlenecks your ability to load your rhomboids, your traps, and your lats is going to be, well, how resilient are the erectors at the epicenter of this rib cage, right, where the ribs meet the T-spine? Because if those are locked in, you got the green light to load the shit out of it. And as we kind of know, loading muscles in more lengthened positions tends to be a little bit more favorable. So when you start talking about the traps and the rhomboids specifically, where those shoulder blades are going to have to move around the rib cage, if you have a base of a strong erector that's been trained with either like a deadlift or a single or a bent over barbell row, you now have the ability to load that much more with all of your other exercises. So I think for me, like, you have to put the first things first. And I think the first things first in this world is you have to put your erectors kind of on blast first. You need to get very good at controlling shear forces of the spine before you do anything, because back training really separates into like two types of movements, right? There's rows and there's pulls, which is more or less to say we're just completing this arc of shoulder extension for the most part from 90 degrees into the overhead. Like, everything just exists there. But I think regardless of where you're pulling from, you're always pulling from your spine when you're training your back. So you need that fucking thing to just be as resilient I hate the word bulletproof because I've seen people get shot before, and I don't care how big you are. If there's not an exercise in the world that's going to make you bulletproof, but you need to start with that foundation of erectors. And I think hinging, like deadlifting, like even in your leg days, like RDLs, stiff legs, your B stance, dumbbell, bent over barbell rows, you need to accumulate a decent amount of your time with your chest parallel to the floor and weight in your hands in some capacity. So that's my one spot, and I think we're echoing a very similar sentiment as to why.
Yeah. And as I listen to you talk and I think in my own brain, I realize why we don't do X number of things for X, Y, and Z. It's because we just explain these things in a way where it explains the interconnectedness of everything here, right? Because you said like my next 3 points in that explanation, I'll still make them, but it's like, we'll just talk about back training and then take the points from it that you take. But this same sort of idea, right? In loading the erectors and like it being easier to isolate muscles that are further from midline or more distal. And if we look at like a lot of back training, like we said, it's going to be dependent on that spinal stability. And then as we go out from there, we'll start to isolate lats, maybe, rhomboids, traps, whatever people do. But spinal stability is the thing that we can't ignore here. So like the ability to stabilize the lumbar spine and the rib cage in a position that now advantages us to create leverage through the muscles that consist of the back, right? So I'm going to lump this all into the category of core stability. But if we look at like lats make up a lot of the width in the back. If we look at the lats, they attach to the pelvis, the lumbar spine, and then they go to the scapula and the humerus, right? That's it. That's your back, right? That's everything in your back, essentially. So if we look at like literally just where we're pulling leverage from or the two places, one place that we're anchoring, one place that we're moving, like we need stability in these locations. And the lumbar spine is going to be the place that is most susceptible in the spine to instability because of, like you said, we don't run into instability issues in the thoracic spine often because of the rib cage and the sternum and all the bones and the cartilage that attach to the spine in the thoracic region. It affords us a ton of structural stability. And even better than that for back training, it affords us a ton of leverage. It's a fulcrum literally for our lats. But it's only a fulcrum for our lats if we understand how to put our lumbar spine, our pelvis in a position that allows us to use it to create leverage through the lats, right? And same thing with our erectors and our rhomboids and our traps as well. Like all of these, like you could use the rib cage as a fulcrum to create a better leverage to load those muscles. So like understanding when we talk about core bracing in general, there's different components to this. There's breathing, and then there's muscular bracing, right? So it's how are we creating tension so that we can manipulate positions so that we can put these muscles in a position where we can now leverage them appropriately or create more force with them. And that understanding comes from core control. That understanding comes from the idea that, like, all right, if I think of my abdominal musculature as my core, if those are my core four, my muscles that are going to control, the place where I don't have any bones is the way that I think of it, right? There's no bones in the front of your abdomen. Below that, in our sacral region, we have our ilium. We have a ton of ligaments and bones that create pelvic stability. We have a ton of ligaments and bones and cartilage that create thoracic stability. We have muscles that they have to do that in the lumbar region or in the abdomen, because there's no structural component in the front of our body. So we have to understand how to use the core musculature now to resist movement at the origin point of our lats, at the origin point of some of our spinal erectors, so that we can put that in a position where now this is solid. This is not going to move, so that we can now put whether it's air or use some other musculature to create positions through the thoracic spine and the rib cage, that now I have a good fulcrum to create tension against load and length through the lats, through the rhomboids, through our erectors, so that I can elicit a stimulus of hypertrophy. So you're not going to get to that point. You're going to be very ineffective at anything that you do that is with a muscle that attaches to the spine if you can't create stability at the spine and as an extension of that at the pelvis as well. So, like, number two, and this maybe thinking about it should have been my number one, because you're not going to be very strong. You're not going to be effective in strength training if you don't understand how to do this also. So, like, core control, I think, has to be a very early on component of this, and, like, not just understanding how to brace your core, but also how to use your core musculature to manipulate your spinal positions so that you can start to advantage muscles in a very specific way.
So I see this a lot in the bodybuilder world when I get reached out to for this very inquiry of like, hey, I'm struggling to develop my back. One of the first things I'll do is just run of the mill, non-specific pronated grip lat pull down. And I'm going to see how they strategize that spinal stability in that movement, right? Because, you can make the argument, you're very unoriginal, that it's not a lat pull down, it's a Terry's pull down. Like, all right, man, like, look, enough weight, as long as your arms don't fall off your body, you full stack it with a gym pin and 45 pounds, then talk to me and tell me how it's not a lat pull down. But I watch, that's like literally the first thing I do is like, hey, send me a video of your lat pull downs. And usually what I get nowadays is I don't do lat pull downs. Like, could you go do lat pull downs, please? So they go do it, and I see a few things, and the strategy that they adopt is, look, they are finding stability if you're moving a humerus on your spine, right? If you're trying to use your lat and the lat goes from the humerus to the spine, you need to find stability at the origin point, like you said. Now, there's two ways to find stability. You can either find it in function or find it in structure. Now, the thing is, so what is it? What do I mean by that? Let's unpack that here for a second. So when I say find stability in structure, I mean in the way that most people feel comfortable in anchoring their spine in space as they move their arm is by finding extension. So if you find extension, you kind of just crash your facet joints into one another, so the bones are resting on the bones. But in doing so, to your point, that's you not putting the spine in the right position and the ribs in the right position to create the fulcrum to train the muscles. Mm-hmm. So one thing that I see all the time with people who struggle with back development in the lat pull down is they put the pad right into their hip, so they sit right in, and then they arch and lean, and they're finding that stability so that they can move their arm on their spine while their spine just sort of crashes into its structure. And I go, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to slide back like 6 inches, maybe 8 to 10, depending on how big you are. Basically, I want that pad that's right in your waist to be more or less right at the edge of your knees. Mm-hmm. Now we have this lever to see how can you tuck your ribs down. Can you basically do a crunch with the amount of weight that you're pulling? It's like kind of it's really the question, right? Mm-hmm. Like, can you find what you would call concentric ab, right? Pushing your rib cage back in space so that now the ribs are pushing into the lats so that they have an advantage mechanically to help extend the shoulder. And I don't know, 65, 66, a third or 2/3 reduction in the amount of load. I'll probably get someone down to, if they're pulling the whole stack, I'll get them in order to maintain that rib cage back, abs on, concentric rectus, eccentric erectors. Then all of a sudden they're going through an eccentric moment as their arm goes back up in a lat pull down. The pad is at their knees. They're fighting tooth and nail to try and keep their ribs down. And all of a sudden when their arm comes up, they don't know how to dissociate their arm from their spine, because the arm comes up and they want their spine to lift. It's like, hold on, you need to be able to dissociate your arm from your spine, because the muscle you're training goes from your arm from your spine. Like you have to, and so you start to see them shake. And it's like, to your point, like you don't have a core strong enough to license you the ability to have a big back. So it's kind of like core control and erector control is really about spinal control. Right. You need to learn, and the difficult part the thing that the lat really puts on offer is that it's expansive. It's you need to show control from T6 to your fucking sacrum onto your ilium into your ribs. So it's like, it's other than, some T6 and up, which is kind of where the rhomboids, almost quite literally the rhomboids are T5. So like your lats stop at one vertebra and your rhomboids come in on the next one. Right? Like it's like fucking T1 to T5 or like C7 or whatever the rhomboids kind of come in. Like they come in and pick up right where the lats leave off. Right. Yeah. And now they don't connect to the humerus, but now you have lat and trap fiber picking up the rest of the way. So it's the idea of spinal control, anterior and posterior, which is huge. And I think it kind of lends me to my second exercise, which is the single arm dumbbell row. Beautiful. Single arm dumbbell row, like go to goats. Like to me, it's one of the bang for buck best exercises that you can do. And for the reason that it shores up that third plane of motion, right? It shores up your flank. It shores up frontal, and it shores up transverse plane movement at the spine, because erectors, there's three of them. Like, and maybe we should start there, right? There's iliocostalis, longissimus, and spinalis. And those move from iliocostalis. So think of the word ilio, like ilium, from the pelvis, costalis, costal to the ribs. So these actually have nothing to do with the spine, right? Now they have to do with the spine because the sacrum is an extension of the spine, and that's fixed to the ilium. And these two things are more or less one and the same. But the muscle is going from the pelvis into the ribs, iliocostalis, and it goes into from pelvis into lumbar, or into thoracic, and thoracic into cervical. But these are out your periphery, and there's an obliquity to these muscles, which means that these aren't just going to be active when you flex forward. They're going to be active when you flex forward and rotate, right? So when you start to talk about shoring up your spine to be able to have a big back, frontal or sagittal plane stuff is all well and good, right? Like the deadlift, like the bent over barbell row, but you're going to introduce a whole new variable. Like I've been doing rows at this new gym I'm at, and I've found a gym with heavy enough dumbbells not to fucking blow my own horn. But now that I'm lifting heavier dumbbells again, dude, my fucking intercostals, my obliques, like I'm pressing in on my lower ribs right now, and dude, they are sore as fuck. Yeah. But that's part of your back, right? I'm pressing on the side of my body, but that's part of because it's stabilizing the ribs that go into the spine. And it's like, that is that should be such a mainstay, right? In your training. Like, I just think, honestly, if you want a big back, you need to spend more time with load running perpendicular rather than vertical. I think a lot of my stuff, other than the benefits you're going to get in scapular function, in going into the full overhead, I want people to notice that so far, what we're really focusing on is getting your chest parallel to the floor and having gravity start to interact with that position, right? Like that's going to be fundamental in building this. Because then when you have that, when you have an ability to fix your origin both anteriorly through the core and posterior through the erectors and multifidus and transversospinalis group and all that, then when you go into some of these more designer exercises and you're more upright, you have a fighting chance. You have a base to build off of. So I want people to see that up until now. So we have deadlift, bent over barbell row, core work and spinal control, and single arm dumbbell row. All of this stuff we're not talking about overhead pulls yet at all, right? And it's funny to watch people struggle with overhead range of motion. And if they were to do these things first, they would probably drastically improve their overhead range of motion. So if you're starting this out, you have poor shoulder mobility, you have poor back development, you probably have weak as piss erectors, super unstable spine.
Yeah.
Deadlift, bent over barbell row, single arm dumbbell row is going to, now you can actually get into the position number one, but also maintain that position well number two. So I want people to see that, like you said earlier, it's like, yeah, we're giving you exercises, but it's the principles that drive these decisions. That's the real takeaway.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like, it's harder for me to give exercise without context just because of the way that my brain works. And I'm sorry.
The fact that it does work.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, running along with that kind of example that you just set there, it's exactly where my brain goes too. And it's like the next concept around this is, in my mind, that is a necessity, is scapular control, right? If we've equated for erectors, we've equated for core and rib cage position. Now we just need to go, one step further out. And then the scapula is an interesting joint in the way that it articulates with the spine and the rib cage and the shoulder, the collarbone itself. Is that like, that's it. Like AC joint is kind of like the thing that connects our scapula to our body. And it doesn't make any sense. Like if you just think of a shoulder blade, because a shoulder blade's on the back of your body, the AC joint's on the front of your body. And like, there's all this surface area, but it's all just fucking muscles, right? There's serratus anterior, there's our rhomboids, there's our traps, there's, everything that connects to that scapula is what creates that stability at the scapula that we just talked about in the lumbar, in the sacrum, in the ilium, in the thoracic spine, the rib cage. Like we have even less luxury at the scapula than we did at the lumbar spine. So understanding that, like, okay, in this pursuit of getting a big back, we're never going to get a big back unless we could deal with heavy loads. Like you need to move a lot of weight if you want a big back. So this is just kind of a step in that process, is that understanding how to create that stability, how to use your rib cage and your spinal position as a fulcrum. Yes, but also we need to understand how to move our scapula independent to our rib cage, independent to our arm even, right? And this does fit with your model of like learning how to deal with forces that are perpendicular to the way that gravity works. Is I really like a chest supported upper back bias row for this. It doesn't need to be like a rhomboid row or a rear delt or a middle trap. Like I don't give a single fuck. But like if it puts you in a position where your chest can't move and you have to understand how to articulate the scapula around the rib cage, like that would be uh, not priority in terms of like dealing with forces. Like I think that a unilateral dumbbell row is a much better way to start to build that association. But I think that builds this in a little bit more isolation, when that's kind of more the integrated side of this is yes, without a chest support, we have to understand how the obliques and the core and the erectors and everything kind of allow us to get into these positions where we can deal with that load. And that's a positive reinforcement that the better that understanding is, the more load we'll be able to deal with in these positions. And then this is kind of the other side, is like, all right, like as you're building that association, like get in this position, there's a ton of external stability. Like it's pretty hard to fuck this up. Just create a greater capacity to move your scapula around your rib cage. And that's going to transfer to a better awareness around scapular mechanics, better ability to execute on creating stability at the scapula, so that again, the goal will be to get you to move into an overhead position eventually. But this is a prerequisite to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm gonna build off that. I like that moving to the scapula next is sort of like the the next frontier once you've got the pelvis and lumbar spine kind of down pat. I think in the pursuit of that, one thing that I like doing is something like, and it doesn't have to be half kneeling on the floor. I actually like using like a bench support, getting the arm more in the overhead in a single arm cable row or something like that. So like a high to low single arm cable row. So we're not going into the full overhead, but I find that for people who especially like, and this is maybe more so not an advanced person, or sorry, not a beginner person, but someone who's more advanced who may struggle with this. What I've found for people who have like habits already instantiated, like people who have been lifting for a long time and struggle with back development. So what I find is getting them in the overhead is going to make scapular movement a lot more inevitable, and they can't just compensate their arm through. So I think for me, dealing with, and not always the case, like, train novice clients as well, but in dealing with people who have like just really bad habits of movement that have clearly led to poor development, the more I can get their arm overhead, to what degree I can, given any limitations in their mobility, the more that scapula is just going to have to come to the table. So in the pursuit of like, all right, let's get your scapula to move independent to your rib cage, like a half kneeling or a bench supported single arm low to high cable row. I think that for me is super useful. And one of the things that you tend to have to break people of from a habitual standpoint is, just like you alluded to, they like to move their ribs with the scapula, right? So you see a lot of sternum movement. Right? So if I'm using my left hand and I'm reaching up towards the cable, but my sternum starts rotating to the right, I know my spine is rotating to the left, which means I have a spine and an arm that are moving, that are changing their orientation, but I'm not changing the shape between those 2 points, right? Because if my sternum is moving, my spine is moving, right? So if my sternum kind of moves away from the armpit that I'm like stretching my lat, I'm not really getting the stretch that I want, and I'm not actually getting the dissociation of the scapula from the rib cage that I want. If anything, I want to use my core to keep my sternum turned towards the side I'm rowing, because I can understand that, look, like the underlying like tectonic plate of the rib cage is shifting away, not with. It's shifting away from the scapula rather than shifting with the scapula. Because if it shifts away from the scapula, we're moving the origin and the insertion away from each other, or not away from each other, in the same direction, as opposed to if I have a sternum that tucks towards my involved side shoulder blade, or my involved side armpit, if you will, as a landmark, I know I have a rib cage underneath that's pulling in one direction while I have a scapula pulling in another, which allow me to kind of anticipate that I'm going to be producing more torque in these movements because I'm having the origin insertion move away from each other than with each other. So in the similar vein of like, hey, we've solved for the pelvis, we've solved for the lumbar spine. What is our next break in the chain when we see development? So spine, pelvis, now it's going to be scapula. I find getting people, to what degree they can, in the overhead a little bit more is going to just elicit more movement, but it's going to elicit a greater potential for compensation, right? So because that movement could be coming from rotation of the spine. So I like that variable of like, hey, this is where we start to fine tune, because these things are not going to be as loadable as some of the movements that we talked about, right? Because we're starting to work now in the periphery, which is like, now we start to get into where all of the foundation that we've built, like if you have someone that you didn't walk through these requisite steps and didn't have them understand, like, if you didn't do a single arm dumbbell row with this person, they're going to really struggle controlling their position. You're going to have to do a lot more coaching and cueing in this single arm low to high or high to low cable row, because like they don't even know how that can move through space. Like they don't know how to dissociate those things. So kind of in chronological order, I like that as a good teaching tool for position. And you got to understand that it's going to be that for a little bit. It's going to be a teaching tool for a minute, because you may not be the most effective rep per stimulus output coefficient right away with an exercise like that. Right. It may take a few weeks, depending on the skill level of the athlete, to be in a position where all of the variables that could go wrong don't go wrong anymore. Like, hey, don't extend your back, keep your pelvis in a neutral. Hey, you're actually pushing too far away. You're losing that frontal plane shift that pushes the rib cage into the lat. Hey, you're reaching too much and you're upwardly rotating your scap. But when you can get that right and you can fine tune it, it's like, okay, now it can be a pretty good exercise. Where all the other exercises we talked about so far have been out of the box, great stimulus per repetition efficiency. Whereas we start to get out to the periphery, we start to get a little bit more liable to all the other moving parts that either need to move a particular direction or need to not move in order to compensate to challenge the muscles that we're trying to challenge. So my next one would be some sort of low to high or high to low supported single arm cable row. I like having the opposite knee forward in the early stages. So like we get this cross body rotational plane thing. If you wanted to move to ipsilateral, so you have like, let's say your left knee tucked into the corner of a bench with your left knee rowing, that's somewhat of a progression, I think, because I want to elicit that control piece. I want to elicit that underlying value of movement quality first before we just go trying to isolate muscles into infinity. So that's kind of my next thing is echo the sentiment, scapular control, one arm, get him in the overhead. Now that's going to be a little bit more advanced than the T-bar row because you need to deal with all these other variables. T-bar is just like, hey, your ribs are fucking not moving. This thing's in your way. The only thing that can move, as long as you keep your head back and you don't dump your fucking cervical spine forward, then you should be in the money. So I think same sentiment, but just like a V 2.0 to the chest supported row would be the single arm cable, like low to high or high to low. I keep fucking that up.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with that. And I love the rationale because it's, I don't know, we think of this exactly the same because why wouldn't we?
That's right. We think of the right way to do it.
Right. Yes. No, I love it. And that's, I think, an important point to make, which you kind of touched on there, is like the order in which we teach these things and we grow this adaptation is like, it kind of has to happen in this order from midline, kind of working our way out in terms of capacity, control, awareness, and then just variability, I guess you could say, in terms of like increasing range of motion. And I think that's really important to understand. That's a really good way to get someone that doesn't have that understanding, that awareness, or that control to execute on these things. So I guess my next point to this would be exercise order and selection, right? Because once someone has that ability and they are, say, an intermediate to advanced level athlete, and they have the ability to execute on all these positions, then it starts to look a little bit differently. Because what we want to do is we want to start to dial in stimulus to the right amounts in the right areas in a way that makes it the most efficient session possible, right? And there's going to be things that will either allow us to elicit more or less fatigue, and not saying that fatigue is the overarching goal, but kind of like you want to get relatively close to failure. Like a close proximity to failure is a pretty good way to get bigger muscles. So what we want to do is we want to orient these stimuluses and organize them in a way that's going to allow them to reach failure, maybe in multiple planes, in different muscle groups, and do it in a way that's relatively safe and repeatable and sustainable. So that, in my mind, comes down to exercise order and selection. So we've gone down this pathway. We've created the levels of awareness and the positions that someone needs to be able to be effective throughout the entire kind of arc of programming for back exercises. Now, a couple of the underlying principles or concepts that we need to be able to understand is like length tension relationships, definitely like where people can produce force and where they're less apt to produce force. And then ideas of like internal versus external stability. These are all things that are either going to enhance or take away from someone's output. And typically the way that I'll look at these things are, all right, where is someone going to be the most resistant for fatigue? And it's probably going to be their most loadable exercise, which in this case might be something like a T-bar row or some variation of a horizontal row. So, okay, all right, this is going to be kind of peak output. This is going to be the thing that, if it is, there's varying degrees of external support that we can dial up or back for a horizontal row, depending on the stimulus that we're trying to elicit. But that's probably going to be the focal point for this workout. And then there's other things that we can pepper in before or after that will allow us to enhance or even handicap that, because sometimes it could be purposefully handicapping that so that we're eliciting fatigue, like a pre-fatigue, so that they're not lifting as much weight there. But understanding, okay, what's the best way to organize this session for this person and their goals and their capabilities. And a lot of times what this looks like for me is we're going to warm up in a very similar way that kind of overarching ways. We want to make sure we have the requisite range of motion. And then we also want to make sure that we have awareness around and capacity to hold core positions and shoulder positions. That's, whatever you want to do for that, rear delt flies, external rotations, pullovers, whatever. I'm probably going to start the exercise off with something that is going to be handicapped in terms of load by the amount of function that it takes to execute it properly. So that's something probably more in the overhead position. Kind of even like you were saying, those bodybuilders that see like a 2/3 reduction in load with their pull down when they get into the right positions is like, great. I wanted you to do something that's really hard with really little weight. And that's going to be something that really creates a stimulus of control in all of the areas that we need you to control to be able to run a lot of fucking current through that system when we load it up. So that's probably going to be my A1. It's something that demands a high level of function. And then B1 is going to be something that they can just fucking send it on. And whether that's like a fully integrated stimulus, like a unilateral dumbbell row, or if that's something that's more externally supported, if we're talking more strictly hypertrophy, like a T-bar row or like a seated cable row, something of that sort, where they can just really fucking send it. And then from there, we're kind of, picking up the scraps, I guess you could say, in maybe more isolated manners, like maybe a rhomboid bias row or like something else that's going to allow them to create another meaningful amount of fatigue in an area that maybe wasn't as biased during their function exercise and their heavy loading exercise. And kind of go through in that order. So like, that's a general layout, but like really the overarching theme is like, once we have full awareness and full capability and full capacity through all these areas, then the thing that's going to be most effective in assigning the stimulus you want is exercise order and selection. And those are some of the variables that are going to allow you to do that appropriately.
Yeah, I think in my last point, I'm gonna again echo yours. I think we should argue more. Actually, I can't. I argue with too many other people in my life. You're the only person that I see eye to eye with.
I can't
Literally, I can't do it. But I think with your principle in mind, if we've made the requisite steps, the pull-up is a great embodiment of what you described in the A1 slot, right? Like something that is just globally your spine is suspended in space, right? There's no anchor to your pelvis other than your core musculature. You need to learn how to, in like almost like an open chain setting, to, without reference, posteriorly tilt your pelvis to push your rib cage back in space so that you can use your lats. And you're getting this upward rotation. You're getting this distraction moment of your humerus. You're getting, you're going through this arc of internal, external rotation. So like that's really like to me, that's the promised land. Like once you've, and for me, and I know this to be true, and I don't get there through doing pull-ups. Like so I'm going to have to let you board this train of thought. Now I'm in a position where my shoulders are so consistently good, which is tough because I've had a lot of injuries, that I can walk into the gym ice cold and knock out pull-ups at 260 pounds. Like that's how my back sessions start. But for a long time when my shoulders weren't good, I couldn't do dips. I couldn't do I'm back doing dumbbell pressing now. I have like hundreds overhead for the first time in fucking, I don't know, 4 years, 5 years. and everything's kind of firing on all cylinders, it's okay. The bang for buck from a function perspective is pull-ups, right? Like all day, every which way. But if I start to lose a bit of my core control, if I'm not training direct core, if I start to lose, if I'm not doing single arm dumbbell rows, core work, hinges, my overhead goes to shit, right? Like if I'm not doing all of these other things that build the base for me to get overhead, my warm-ups start getting really long, right? Then I'm grabbing kettlebells, I'm grabbing a lacrosse ball, I'm grabbing a dowel, I'm grabbing a band. And all of these are just indicators that something's missing in my program, right? And when I figure out what the loadable exercise is to the corrective exercise that I'm doing, and I inform my accessory exercise selection based off of the needs of what I need to do to prepare for a pull-up, I then just go, okay, I need to find a loadable variant of these correctives in my actual accessory programming. And then once I get past a threshold where, I'm rowing 150 plus, I'm hinging in the 300 or 400s, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can just go onto a pull-up bar and do this now. And then there's a compounding efficiency of my sessions. And the longer people do this, I'm sure they've had this conversation where your workouts start to look like my workouts are starting to look like they did when I was 18 again. Yeah. I just didn't know why I was doing what I was doing. Now it's like, okay, you see all of the mechanisms behind it. So for me, it's like the last exercise, I guess my third one that makes this list, 6 principles of back hypertrophy, is really like the pull up as the embodiment of this instability principle in the most unstable position, right? Like in this distraction. Basically, the pull-up is to the shoulder joint what the hinge is to the spine. So we've shored up the spine at its origin with hinging and bent over rowing and single arm rowing, and we've got out into the scapula. Now we're really focused on shoring up the stability at the shoulder. If we have a stable shoulder, we have a stable spine, we're gonna have a fucking massive back.
Yeah, I fucking love it. And I love the principle that comes out of that too, is that like building a bigger back is not just done on your back day, right? It's also done on your pressing day and it's done on your leg day. And the underlying theme for all that is, yes, sound programming, but also a high level of function, right? It comes from shoulder function. It comes from a high level of core and spine and hip function. Like all these things interplay with one another. And if there's a kink in the armor anywhere there, it's going to affect your back training, right? It's going to handicap you somewhere, and then you're going to get pigeonholed into what you have to do instead of having that variability in what you can do. So I think that's a big takeaway too. I'm not sure if I gave one exercise besides a deadlift today. I just talked a bunch. But.
You know what? This is why people listen to this podcast. Because you can extrapolate out your entire program from these principles. So, we just give a couple of examples of exercises. Look, okay, so let's recap it from the top. You were on hinging, deadlifting, but really hinging of all sorts. Yes. I was like pretty much same thing with bent over barbell row. It's hinging with some shoulder perturbation, a little bit less load. You jump. I was erector. You were core.
Yep.
Right. So, and then you were scap control, T-bar, chest supported, and then I was single arm lat. You were then scapular function, overhead position, and then I was pull up.
Beautiful, nailed it.
That's how 6 ways to whatever the fuck gets done here at RX Radio. Subscribe. Hey, do the thing where you share it on Instagram so we can retire and be podcasters.
That's it. That's all I really want out of this.
You know what? We're 600 deep. I think we've earned it. So, we're not going to do a GoFundMe or anything. Just share the episode. And, for one share, you can have, kids like us retire on $1 a day or whatever world version shit we got going on. But appreciate you guys hanging out. If you guys, I don't know, go to the YouTube channel. I think is probably the best way to communicate what you want us to do. We might do some Q&As here in the future. But I don't know, maybe we just run this very memeified 6 ways to do whatever, and we'll do it in our way. Because I thought that was good. I like that one.
Yeah, that was fun. I think we'll just make clickbait titles and then just talk about whatever the fuck we want.
Amazing. Done deal. All right. Thanks so much, guys.